Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Hugh McKay, President of the Board of Directors of the City Club. Concerns with government waste, fraud, and abuse have become increasingly prominent in recent years. Our speaker, Congressman Darrell Issa, representing California's 49th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, has played a leading role as a watchdog to curb abuses in government. Representative Issa's career prior to Congress was impressive and prepared him well for his tough duties in Congress. As a senior in high school, Representative Issa enlisted in the United States Army. He was commissioned as an Army officer, was an explosive ordnance disposal technician, which surely prepared him well for Congress, and ultimately obtained the rank of captain. He completed his active duty military service in 1980 and turned his interest to the private sector. There he founded and served as CEO of California-based Directed Electronics. In 1994, Issa was named Entrepreneur of the Year by Inc. magazine. As a congressman and leader in California grassroots politics since 2001, Representative Issa has championed the cause of efficient government and has pushed legislation to balance the federal budget and promote transparency across federal bureaucracy. In 2003, Representative Issa was the architect behind the successful recall of former Democratic California Governor Gray Davis. Representative Issa's efforts to fight human trafficking along the United States border has resulted in tougher laws and stiffer penalties. He's also exposed fraud and mismanagement at the Mineral Management Service. And recently, Representative Issa has pushed the Justice Department for accountability with respect to Operation Fast and Furious involving gun shipments to Mexico. When Congress was asked to pass the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, Representative Issa put forward a proposal to create a bipartisan commission to uncover the root causes of the financial crisis. This idea was passed into law in early 2009, and the investigation commenced in January 2010. At the beginning of the 111th Congress, the House Republicans tapped Representative Issa to serve as the top Republican on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, which is the main investigative committee of the United States House of Representatives charged with protecting the interests of U.S. taxpayers and eliminating waste, fraud, abuse in the federal bureaucracy. On top of his impressive career in the military and business and in Congress, surely Representative Issa's greatest claim to fame is having been born and raised here in Cleveland, Ohio. So please welcome to the City Club our native son, Representative Darrell Issa.
You know, compared to those glib lines Gary did, you did pretty well. Although, I got to tell you, some of those lines I'm going to steal. Well, one of your favorite sons here, Dennis Kucinich, had he won the three-way race, would have been my ranking member. So it would have been, you know, Issa Kucinich, and then if the majority changed, it would have been Kucinich Issa, and you would have had so much more fun watching C-SPAN than you do now. My mom's not here. I moved her out to California, but my brother, brother-in-law, sister, and a lot of friends are. And so it's with a great deal of pride as a Clevelander, as a Kent State grad, here with my brother, a Case Western grad, that I'm looking and saying, well, there's a lot of great institutions that are represented here. And so, you know, we look at Cleveland and say, Cleveland's a lot like where we are in the federal government. Cleveland's finest hour, its greatest time, was roughly 1945, maybe 1950. I think we peaked in population somewhere in that time frame. Corporate headquarters extraordinaire, a place of great employment, very high pay, known for a highly unionized workforce that got far better salaries than the population as a whole, and was the envy of the nation. When I was a young boy, well, that guy over there with the beard and I were young boys together, we used to go out to Pymatuning, and we'd go camping, and it was an interesting time because we could only stay for 2 weeks, and the limit apparently was 2 weeks, and then you had to move campsites. But the steel workers, they were there for 12 weeks because they had 12 weeks off. So every 2 weeks they would move campsites because that was the reality of Cleveland 50 years ago. 50 years has done a lot to Cleveland, and you see it, for good and sometimes not so good. But the United States hasn't really felt until literally Friday the full effects of 50 years of generally wrong direction. Now, when I say wrong direction, let's not get it wrong. We have been a great consumer nation. We have done a wonderful, wonderful job of improving the quality of our lives. We've gotten rid of the steel mills and the auto productions and rubber plants and all those stinky things that, we sent that to China. China now the largest manufacturing country on the face of the earth. And why did we do it? Well, because we could. We no longer can. On Friday, when S&P, whether you agree or disagree, whether that $2 trillion arithmetic problem they had, where they were only off by $2 trillion, so S&P is not going to change their position on the downgrade to AA because it was only $2 trillion. Whether you agree with that or not, the United States has been enjoying for 50 years, plus 60 years, the effects of World War II. There are people in this audience who came here either before or just after World War II, or their families came. They know that Europe was in ruins. Asia was in ruins. South America was under governments that were never going to be successful. The fact is, nowhere in the world did you have what we have here in the United States. It's now 6 decades later. China is the largest manufacturing country in the world. They have about a 10% GDP growth, and it's not all roses. I can see some problems there where they're going to look a little like Japan in another 5 years. And we're going to see that it wasn't a bulletproof, perfect economy by a long shot. But they do understand one thing in China, in South Korea, in Taiwan, and they even begin to understand it in Ireland and other places. And that is that if you're 2% more expensive or harder to deal with or more regulated or slower or whatever particular impediment to job creation exists, over time you will underperform, and over time your competitors will do better. It's that simple. We are now at that point. Our competitors are fierce. They really do get it. They understand capital formation. They learned it from us. They understand regulations. And in the case of the Europeans, they're finding ways actually to reduce those regulations, something that no one ever thought socialist Europe would do. I mentioned Ireland. Ireland did two things. They created an incredible fast track to get production. If you were an important industry, you got into Ireland quickly. And they created a tax that was just slightly less than the rest of Europe, and a hiring policy that said, look, if you don't want a worker, you don't have to keep them. Well, Germany says if you don't want a worker, you don't have to keep them, but you just have to pay them. You can see why you might choose to set up there. One of the investigations that is ongoing, and literally on Sunday we served a subpoena on the National Labor Relations Board, is whether or not we get it as a government. Right now, the National Labor Relations Board is suing in court at your expense, your tax dollars, Boeing, because Boeing is expanding jobs, 1,000 jobs in South Carolina, in Charleston. Well, they're expanding 3,000 jobs, same lines, the 787, the Dreamliner, in Everett, Washington. The definition is, of course, they're being retaliatory. They're punishing their union for the strike. Now, I'm a funny sort of guy, but if you punish me by giving me 3,000 more union workers, I would say it was a fairly benign punishment. Okay, I'm going to get a laugh eventually on some of these. I work hard, I really do. Now, why is Boeing putting 1,000 jobs in South Carolina? Oh, it's easy. They may not say it. I'll tell you. We've held hearings there. They're doing it because Virgin Atlantic and other companies who committed to buy 787s would only keep those orders in place if they had what Airbus has, which is a guaranteed delivery. Airbus, this highly regulated multi-country conglomerate, producing part of their plants in Germany and part of their airplanes in England and a big part in France, and flying them all over. This group, every one of those countries signed an agreement that says we will not have work stoppages. We can have all the other fights that unions have, but we're not going to have work stoppages. Boeing couldn't get that from their union in Everett, Washington. Therefore, at least one that has come public, Virgin, but others said, look, we're not going to give you the orders if you can't give it to us. So they said, okay, we can give it to you. We've got another place we can put up a line, and we will guarantee that your aircraft will come out of there, a total of 3 a month. Not a lot of aircraft, but enough for those who absolutely insist that if there's a work stoppage, they still get their delivery on time. This is common sense. This is what everybody in this room, whether you're, if you will, rabidly pro-union or not so much, you'd say, well, it makes sense. These are incremental sales that you won't have unless you make sure it happens. Well, your government is trying to shut that down. They can't make the people in South Carolina vote a union in. They just voted the union out not too long ago, and they voted them out for cause. That's the America that has to change. Now, can we change the S&P rating? No. And do I care? Less than you think. China has a AA minus. And they're taking 300, 400, 500 billion of our money in excess of what we get from them. They're winning. They have huge reserves. But they're not a country that people trust, or at least the S&P and Moody's trust as much as they trust us. We are still going to be very trustworthy. What are we going to have to do to change? Yes. The tenor in Washington that led to forcing a incredibly combative, down to the limit, both sides artificially creating this upheaval. Republicans, because we'd never had a vote on raising the debt limit that was that controversial before. The president, because he said he wouldn't extend. It absolutely had to be August 2nd, even though there was nothing magical except he said it'd be August 2nd and he wouldn't extend it. Both of them did it. I said that S&P downrating us wasn't the end of the world. Here's why it isn't. If we hadn't had that confrontation, what would S&P have done? If we just ignored the Ryan budget, as they did, if we just continue passing appropriations, and if we just raised the debt limit, would that have caused us to keep our AAA rating? No. Did we do enough to keep our AAA rating? No. Did we get a wake-up call that we have to change how much government spends? Yes. Before I take questions, a couple of things I wanted to touch on, though. Government and you can talk about what a fine is versus a tax, and it's a clever line. But the greatest tax that government puts on business is uncertainty. Uncertainty about air quality, water quality, whether or not you're going to get a permit, how long it's going to take to put up a major expense, whether or not an expense that you have to amortize over 20, 30, 40 years is going to be in an environment that's going to be favorable. Uncertainty is the greatest tax, because uncertainty taxes your ability to make a profit, while most taxes only tax the profit you make. Ultimately, uncertainty can keep you from making a tax and save you all those terrible taxes, which is not something any of us want to. Roughly half of all Americans pay no net income tax. That's not because half of all Americans want to pay no net income tax. It's partially because we've become a society of haves and have-nots. We have not created a society that has a larger and larger and larger pool of people who can make, name a figure, $60,000 a year. Not minimum wage and not masses. How do we get back to that? Who do we have here that has an economics degree or even loved a couple of courses you were forced to take? Okay, you do. You loved it. And you ended up in banking, right? There we go. Well, when I took economics, the first thing they, of course, taught you was unlimited demand and limited resources. The next thing they taught you was there's only 3 things that create wealth, and it ain't banking. Manufacturing, mining, and agriculture. If we cannot participate in providing food to ourselves, and we can't participate in mining, and we can't manufacture, and manufacturing today does include that next great software package. It does include producing chips and lots of things, software for them that are soft, not hard. But if we cannot do that, we will not, in fact, be a wealthy nation. So what do we have to do? You only have to go as far as Intel. Craig Barrett, when he was CEO of Intel, said he would never produce another chip, or never put up another plant to produce chips in California, period. He didn't say until things changed. He gave up. It was under Gray Davis. It was one of the items that really spurred me on to lead the recall. Not because Gray Davis was a bad guy. He wasn't a bad guy. He just wasn't good enough. And as a proud Republican, the guy that came after him wasn't either. Well, that's even before he got in trouble. Okay. We didn't know how bad he was when he was. The fact is, though, California continues to be on the wrong track, and jobs continue to leave. Rick Perry's going to run for president, and his only claim to fame is he got those jobs that California threw away. Now, I'm not that impressed with that yet. I want to know if he can get jobs that America threw away back to America. Now, there's a good applause line. To do so, though, we're going to have to ask the question, what's the most important priority? Is the most important priority finding a way to get the job done? Now, I've got a lieutenant colonel here, and from the time he was a butter bar, the most important thing was getting the job done. You know, you had to do it by the rules, but boy, I'll tell you, you could work those rules until you found a way to get the job done. Mission had to be accomplished. Well, our mission is, in fact, to be a credible part of the mining, manufacturing, and growing for the world, and then the jobs that spring from those, because the vast majority of jobs in America still will come from something other than those industries. I'll give you one example. My wife and I like to RV. And by the way, this is my wife, Kathy, in case you thought I wasn't a politician. I would say long-suffering, but too many of my family are here. They know that. We went through Ely, Nevada. Now, you heard about Ely, Nevada over the weekend because that's where Harry Reid threw that hissy fit because he couldn't get a $3,000 subsidy on every FAA ticket coming out of there so people could fly out of Ely, Nevada and only pay $200 for a ticket that really was costing thousands. It's also known because they mine copper there. We went through there. There's this huge stack. It's an amazing stack there. And it goes up. Kathy, you remember, was it the second largest in the world or whatever it was? So it's brick for as far as you can see. Even by Cleveland standards, this is a heck of a smokestack. And there's no smoke coming out of it because they don't smelt there anymore. They mine copper and they send it to China, and China smelts the copper. Now, why do they do it? Obviously, it's because we haven't figured out how to have enough electricity at a fair enough price, enough fuel, because they're certainly using, and by the way, we ship coal by the shipload to China. So the fuel they're using to smelt, we sell them. The definition of a third world country is, in fact, somebody who delivers raw materials and doesn't do the additional processing. There's a classic example where we need to recapture that. We need to recapture all the secondary operations on it. I'm going to close because they did promise that I'd take questions and answers against my better judgment. And I'm going to tell you about something else. My committee is an interesting committee. It's really three committees. It used to be called the Government Ops Committee. It also was called the DC Committee. It was also called the Postal Committee. Some decade ago, or 2 decades ago, they combined them all. So you got one committee that had 3 jobs. So yes, I do have the District of Columbia. Any of you have complaints, you know, go see Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, and she'll bring it to me. But I also have the Post Office. An entity that at its height did about $75 billion in business, is doing about $65 billion today, is losing, the estimate was 8.5, but last quarter they lost $3 billion alone. They're losing 15% on sales and growing. They have 170,000 workers who actually aren't needed. They just signed no layoff contracts. No layoff contracts where you have 170,000 workers you don't need and your cost is higher. And 80% of their cost are labor. So they're approaching a point where if you threw away all the cost except labor, you still wouldn't break even. That's how bad it is. We have about 15% loss and only 20% of their expenses are non-labor. And that includes all the facilities, the maintenance, the whole bit. Can we fix it? Sure. There's about $20 billion that can be taken right out of it. And let me just give you one, because you're going to hear about it in the days to come. And you're going to say, gosh, why is anyone wasting airtime telling me about fixing the post office? It's only a $75 billion industry. Because fixing the post office is exactly like fixing government. It's a business. It provides an essential government-required service, and it's doing a bad job. Now, if you can fix that, maybe we can fix the FDA a little bit and get our processing time for new and innovative medicines down to maybe where Germany is. Can you imagine we're behind the rest of the world in in approval of innovative products, even though we're the innovator. Right now, the FDA finds itself constantly having to approve clinical trials that are going on in other countries because they're easier and faster and cheaper to do there. Again, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with hearing that something in another country was approved, but more and more, since you're going to get approval in Europe faster, that's where you're going to do the clinical trials, and then we're going to be in also RAND with a much more limited opportunity to really know what happens. But let me go through the post office quickly and I'll take questions. How many of you, because this is an older neighborhood, I said quickly, I really meant it. How many of you get your mail in a chute up by your front door? Okay, about 10%, 20%. How many get it at a box at the front or a cluster of boxes somewhere in your unit? About 80%. Well, you're pretty typical, I thought it would be a little more of the chute, of America. About 109 million homes get it at a box somewhere at their front lawn or at the corner or something. They all call them clusters when there's more than one. And 37 million people get them in the chute, front door. Those of you who get them in the chute are not going to get them in the chute much longer if I have my way. So be mad at me today. Because if you get yours delivered to the front door, instead of the front door, to the curb, we save $5.5 billion a year in labor. 37 million homes, we save $5.5 billion, and the 109 million homes that are already getting it at the corner or at the front, they get the same service now, and you get the same service. Unifying the service to basically near your house, but not literally walking up your private driveway, saves 5.5. If we, instead of putting them one per one at the corner, we put them in clusters of 4 or greater, we save another $2.5 billion. In other words, if you moved everyone from the corner, and by the way, it pays for itself in 7 months, so it's like one bad year and you've converted. Just changing to cluster boxes for the 37 million homes that are not currently at the curb would take care of the entire expected loss for this year. Only if you also trim the workforce that you don't need when in fact you're more efficient. Well, we haven't trimmed the workforce of 170,000. This will be another 80,000 people not needed if we trim it. So if we have the will to make sure the post office delivers, and by the way, that's before we go to 5-day a week from 6-day a week that you all hear about, which is another $3 billion in savings. We can provide services at a break-even or a profit for the postal system instead of a huge loss if we simply apply common sense, which is where can you make the savings? It's in labor. How can you save labor? Find ways to be efficient. What is the value of home mail delivery? Is it for some people to get it inside their house? Or is it to have it so close? And by the way, the post office, even for rural delivery, has always had the ability, if you're not able to get out of your house, you send them a little note and they'll deliver into your home. Those exceptions of people who truly have no one to come to the curb are a de minimis cost. So we're not talking about somehow people not being able to physically get their mail. I could go through a lot of the other cost savings, but then I really would bore you with the post office. My committee is dedicated to make sure that we at least make a model of that. You can take the same model and you can model almost every other government service. Probably the only one you can't model that way is the United States military. Because quite frankly, we don't want efficiency out of the military, we want effectiveness. We don't want you to succeed 80 or 90% of the time. We're looking for 100% success. And as I've been taught by other politicians, it doesn't matter how meek the applause is, quit when you hear it. I'd love to take your questions on any subject.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a special forum featuring the Honorable Darrell Issa, U.S. Representative for California's 49th District. We will return to our speaker in a minute for the traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate your questions now. Please remember to keep them brief. We remind you that members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we hope everyone listening will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. Please visit our website to see a full schedule of our upcoming programs. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partners, WVIZ, PBS Idea Stream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. This Friday, August 12th, the City Club welcomes former U.S. Senator John Warner and Vice Admiral Dennis McGinn, who will discuss accelerating the clean energy economy and enhancing energy security. Next Wednesday at 5 p.m., Abraham Foxman, National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, will address Palestinian unilateralism. For more information about our upcoming forums, please refer to the back of your printed program, or you can go online. If you wish to make reservations or order a CD or DVD of today's program, please call 1-888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082. We're pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Case Western Reserve University, Kent State University, and Key Bank. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now we'd like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Well, Congressman, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed your talk. I thought it was very informative. I guess
good?
No, yeah, it's good. No, it's very. I definitely have some points that I disagree, but I think that it was very informative, and you expressed yourself very well. The next 35 days, we'll be celebrating, unfortunately, the horrific events of September 11th. And although, how can I even say this? Although Osama bin Laden has been killed and the military has worked extremely hard to eradicate Al-Qaeda, it almost seems as if the terrorists were very successful in their mission of destroying the fabrics of America. And I say that because if we were to rewind 10 years ago, would the world ever question the integrity of America being able to pay its obligation and to honor its word? 10 years ago, would you even have talked about S&P downgrading America's debt? And, if we were to rewind 10 years ago, it just seems like things were better back then than they are now. And so my question is, do you think the terrorists were very successful in destroying some of the fabrics of America? And if not, Congressman, how do you actually explain the divisiveness of what's going on in America? I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. It just seems like there's a lot of divisiveness, not only in government, but in business, on almost all aspects throughout our country. And then my second question relates to yeah, we can ask more than one question there. My second question relates
Only
to...
if your name's Sam Donaldson.
my second, this is a lighter subject, and I know you'll like this, but the tax code. I mean, because I think everyone in this audience will agree that we do pay extremely high taxes. My question is, what would it take for America to reform the tax code where it resembles Switzerland, where you have extremely low corporate tax rates? The citizens actually get the opportunity to vote. They get to vote. How high they pay taxes. In addition to that, while also having a consumption tax. So thanks.
Well, I'll take it a little bit in reverse order because the light one is probably easier to do. There's no question that we're heading toward looking at a national sales tax / consumption tax. And there's a number of reasons for it. And quite frankly, it's the only way to get a, quote, regressive tax passed. Because when you talk about taxing, quote, working people, the democracy starts to work rather perversely. And they say, well, you can't do that. Instead, stick it to the rich. Well, when they came up with the income tax, it was only a single digit on the very rich. It was the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Mellons, maybe 2 or 3 others. They were really only targeting a few rich people. And within a matter of a few decades, we had a technical rate that was over 50% on virtually everyone. That's the nature of government. So if you start off with something that can't be fudged, like a VAT, you do tend to at least have an honest tax. And if you want to give people something, you give it to them. You give them aid, but you don't hide the aid that you're actually giving. And there's a lot to be said for that. I'm not advocating that because it's a pretty complex kind of a kabuki dance of getting out of one thing and into another unless you just absolutely want to take a bunch more money, which is popular in Washington. 10 years ago, I had a class reunion. This past weekend, I had a class reunion. The difference was 10 years ago, we did it over Thanksgiving. So I came in to meet with my classmates and got yelled at by one of my closer classmates and his wife because she was a nurse and she couldn't get Cipro because anthrax was going to kill us all. We had just been attacked. We had people in the hospital. Congress was, and the Senate particularly, although the House building I was in had to be evacuated. We had contamination on both sides, probably from a terrorist homegrown, we now pretty much believe. But that was the world we lived in. We'd been attacked for real by foreigners who wanted to kill us, who flew their airplanes every place they could, and the only argument was which one was going to hit the White House versus the Capitol, the one that's in Pennsylvania or the one that hit the Pentagon. President Bush at that time said, you know, this won't change us. He was wrong. Yes, it cost us $1 trillion in the war effort, and that isn't what downgraded our S&P rating. It caused us to pass the Patriot Act. It caused us to allow law enforcement to continue taking liberties, which they're still trying to take to this day. And those liberties being taken, including, we all complain about TSA. There's 57,000 people at TSA. That's 57,000 people doing the job that, for all practical purposes, was being done by maybe 3,000, 10 years ago. That's 57,000, a permanent burden. The men and women of the armed forces will come home. We already are beginning to scale back on Marines' actual end strength, and there's going to be some reduction and a considerable savings. But there's not going to be a peace dividend as long as we continue to live in terror, as long as we continue to put safety and security ahead of liberty and your money being your money. So I'm not going to make a judgment call, except that we should be able to do better. We should be willing to say we'll take some risk because there will always be people who hate us. I grew up in an almost all Jewish neighborhood, very closely aligned to Israel. I don't want to live like Israel. We shouldn't have to live like Israel. We shouldn't have to live under those conditions. And if I have my way, we won't. I'm pushing back right now on my own chairman in Judiciary who's trying to actually have us order all the ISPs, all the people you think of for the internet, to keep all their data for a year under the guise that either terrorism, which is the silent part of the bill, or child pornography needs to be traced. Now, it's not child pornography because the bill outright says it's titled child pornography, but nowhere does it limit it to anything. It'll be for anything. A year's worth of every single click to every single site you go to on the internet. And if they can keep that, they being us, then why can't they keep the GPS location of where you are right now for a year and everywhere you go over that year? Because that data is just as able to be kept. So am I a staunch conservative Republican? Yeah. And the Dennis Kucinich side of the House and the Darrell Issa side of the House are equally concerned that we've got to push back and get back to being the country that was willing to take some real risk back home to have both liberty and competitive affordability, which means we've got to cut back on some of the areas that we thought were so important after 9/11 that are in fact costing hundreds of billions of dollars, and I think we will.
Good afternoon.
Did you agree with something I said? Because I'm only getting a yes after the answer.
Good afternoon, Congressman. I've agreed with much of what you've said, but my question is a little bit perhaps out of right field today. I was intrigued in the introduction by your background, which I was not familiar with, in being a successful entrepreneur. And so I wanted to ask you, given the ties you have to this area, to Cleveland, how you think we're doing in that regard. Over the last 10 years, we've had a lot of efforts to retool our economy around Northeast Ohio to promote entrepreneurial activity. How do you think we're doing? What should we be focusing on? And I'm particularly interested in light of one of our recent City Club speakers as well, Jim Clifton, who's the head of the Gallup organization. And he made the rather, I thought, sort of provocative point that entrepreneurial activity will save America, but not on a national scale or even on a state basis, but on a city by city, one area at a time. So given your background and his comments, curious how you think we're doing and what we should be focusing on.
Well, I'm not going to say you're doing well. I mean, I think if you look at the numbers, Cleveland's still having some challenges. But Kathy and I today, we drove in. We were staying over on the east side, but we went down 480 and then we went down into the flats and we took Canal and Harvard and just wound our way, literally never taking 77 the whole way up. Now, yes, we went through some steel storage areas that used to be steel manufacturing, but we also went through the Emerald Necklace and pieces of the park and so on. Obviously, we have representatives here from Case Western and from Kent. Cleveland has everything going for it except its weather. Oh, come on, this is not something you didn't know. And since we can't change the weather, you have to be willing to say, okay, we're not going to succeed for people whose bones are getting old and they don't want to be here anymore and they go to Miami. But we can succeed for young people who are looking for a much more affordable cost of starting, some of which is because we have a lot of assets that are underutilized. Clean air, clean water, tremendous amount of low-cost energy. A governor who some of you voted for, some of you may not have, but a governor who's trying to make Ohio just a little bit more competitive than the other states, sort of the Texas model of can we cause people to choose us over somewhere else, particularly if there's a consolidation between a facility here and a facility somewhere else. So can Cleveland do all of that? Absolutely. You mentioned it, though, and I'll touch on it. There's, I think, 170,000 people that work for Sony. There's 1,400 that work for Facebook. Facebook has a market cap about twice what Sony is. So you got a $70 billion entity, and rising probably $1 billion as I've spoken, with 1,400 employees. If you focus in the old way on employees, on how many people can we employ, you're missing the whole point. It's what can you create that didn't exist? What can you reinvent to be different? This is the home of Mr. Coffee. This is a place where somebody came up with the idea, actually Sam Glazer, Vince Marotta, and Miles Hunsinger, and a couple of other smart people. They figured out how to take an $8 chrome coffee pot and turn it into a $79 Mr. Coffee machine and dominate an industry. That was a generation ago. The assets are still here to do things like that. Is this the right place to do it? It's one of the right places. Is it easy to market? No, it's hard. You know, one of the challenges is, and I would challenge Kent and Case both. What are your programs to keep entrepreneurism here? What is your program to actually have your engineers not leave? What is the synergy that keeps people going? Now, your medical students, it's pretty easy to look at Cleveland Clinic and say, boy, I'll tell you, if you can keep some there, and this is a growing area. But we can't just be about the sick. You know, I'm keen on Cleveland, but I will tell you, 30 years ago, Kathy and I left Cleveland because moving our corporate headquarters to California as an electronics company was an immediate marketing advantage. And I'm sad to say that we made that decision because we didn't make better product when we went to California. As a matter of fact, we made a lot of it here still, but it sold better. Sometimes you have to face that, and that's one of the challenges, is can Cleveland be known for a Facebook and suddenly be known as a place where you could do that? Can we be known for some other products? It's a big marketing job, but Cleveland, like other cities that have all these great resources at an affordable price, can do it. I expect they will, but I don't expect it to take the place of Tucson in the winter.
Good afternoon, Congressman. My question centers on, I guess, the job environment.
You're the guy I insulted your whole banking industry earlier.
You may have touched on this in your prior answer, but you outlined a number of, I guess, initiatives that the post office or any other government entity can embark on to achieve greater efficiency. But I guess moving forward, how does America succeed when we find ourselves in a job environment that requires us to cut labor in order to just like balance the budget almost? I mean, how do we add jobs when, I mean, the only thing we can talk about to, I guess, get back in the game is to cut labor? So, and I mean, you outlined agriculture and mining, and I think you said something about...
Well, those are core industries that'll take a long time to come back. The reason government has to cut labor is very simple. We're overhead. We're not the factory floor. We're that jerk in the back office that you never see and doesn't seem to add a thing. Now, that may, the bank president may be here, and I better be careful, but the fact is that, you know, government's a rock in the knapsack. Name what government does for you. If you need a letter delivered at 43 cents, you need a letter delivered at 43 cents. Well, right now it's costing almost 50 cents to deliver it at 43 cents. So somebody's going to pay for that sooner or later. Right now they're in default. They're literally not paying into their own retirement, but expecting that the taxpayers will take care of their retirement. So do you hike or bicycle? Yeah. Good, good. Now, would you like to have a lead bicycle and a 50-pound pack and try to keep up with the guy on that, that carbon fiber bicycle with the little thin tires? Government is simply that extra weight. There are some services we provide, but those services provided at the least expensive rate is the least rock in the knapsack. My father-in-law, Kathy's dad, he was big on the rock in the knapsack. He was a pilot. He understood that whatever you put on board is just overhead to the airplane. The airplane stripped empty with just enough fuel to take off performs great. Everything after that makes the takeoff harder. That's the reason we're doing it. If you're a Keynesian, you have this theory that somehow those government jobs losing will cause unemployment to rise. Well, if that's the case, then Henry Ford destroyed the auto industry and destroyed America by producing more cars with less people, because ultimately he destroyed more jobs than anyone else in history probably by pushing down the cost of making a car in the amount of labor. But that ultimately is what created the auto industry, and by the way, it also created vast wealth for everyone, including the highest paid workers at their time anywhere in the world were Ford factory workers. They were also the most productive. I think that might have answered a little of it.
Congressman Issa, thanks for coming to Cleveland, returning to Cleveland.
Anytime, I even come in the winter.
Yeah, true Clevelander. So I want to shift topics a little bit. President Obama's Justice Department authorized and ran Operation Fast and Furious, which resulted in thousands of firearms being sold illegally to Mexican drug cartels. One of these guns was used in the murder of at least one United States border agent by the Mexican drug cartels. Even the liberal comedian Jon Stewart said incredulously, the ATF plan to prevent American guns from being used in Mexican gun violence is to provide Mexican guns with American guns, Mexican gangs with American guns. And he asked, if this is the plan that they went with, what plan did we reject? Congressman Allen West reportedly has demanded that Attorney General Eric Holder resign because of this scandal. I understand your committee is investigating this operation, and my question is, where does the investigation stand? How far up the chain of command did this operation go? And do you think that Eric Holder should resign?
Well, thank you. That's a question I've been waiting for. Now, this is a hard subject to talk about. I mean, I came here knowing that S&P downgraded America. The market is reacting today. It's about jobs. It's about getting our economy going again, and it's about what the role of government is going to be. But my committee, which is the largest staffed committee in the Congress, exists to be the balance between the executive branch, some 3 million people, and our branch, less than 10,000 people, and my committee has 120 of them. That's most of the people in Congress are doing research related to legislation and so on. Our 120 people are supposed to find areas of misconduct in the administration, and we prioritize it, at least under my chairmanship. First, life. Absolutely, if somebody dies, wrongfully, we want to know why and how. Second, and it's an awfully close second, is the whole threat to Constitution, the whole question of like FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. When you ask for information about what your government is doing, are you getting it? Or is it being distorted and denied so that just like third world countries, they do what they want to do and you don't even know to object? In the case of Fast and Furious, it touches both. This administration under Eric Holder, although we can't say he knew about it, we can only say he should have known about it, because his primary deputies, two of his deputy attorney generals and his special attorney general for the whole prosecution side, Lanny Brewer, all were intimately familiar, signed off on subpoenas, wiretaps, and the like. The plan was just something. How many of you have been in the military other than the colonel here? Okay, no, that's not enough. We used to think in the military they'd had the dumbest ideas. One group rakes the stones and then somebody comes and messes them up so the next group can come in and rake the stones because they're going to train you about how to be disciplined and organize things. Having to have exact spacing in your uniforms or they tear apart your locker and you have to do it again. There's a lot of things that are really dumb in the military and until you understand why you do them, they just are dumb. And an order is an order. In this case, this was beyond dumb. 2,500 weapons, including 34 50 caliber sniper rifles. And I don't know how many an Army Ranger unit has, but a Marine regiment has 35 of those 50 cals. This is an incredible amount of power. It's downed helicopters in Mexico, confirmed with some of these weapons. They were deliberately allowed to walk based on the idea they were going to trace them. Except as we get into it, there was no tracing. They didn't put tracing devices on them. All they had was a serial number when it left and a serial number when it was found at the scene of the crime. And yes, it was found at the scene of the crime of the exact drug cartels that they knew they were. And the only people they've arrested, sans one, were the actual guys, most of them hooked on meth, who did the straw buying. The problem we have is not this stupid program. I don't think anytime soon a stupid program exactly like this would go on again, even though they haven't agreed that it was dumb enough not to do it. The question is, how did the process of approvals, of checks and balances between the various law enforcement agencies, DEA, FBI, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Fire, how did that not get a check and balance by the U.S. Attorney and the Attorney General's office? Why is it they were all in the same sort of lockstep? Why is it as soon as this became public, the administration decided they were going to expand the gun database, and the colleagues of mine on the other side of the aisle offered new gun control legislation? Well, this isn't about gun control as in the bad guys being able to get it. This is about the federal government giving them to the bad guys. So we're a little befuddled that the system failed this badly. And Senator Grassley, who's my counterpart on Judiciary, and myself, our whole point is, one, we want that formal apology. We want that it won't happen again. We want Brian Terry and Jaime Zepeda, the other agent who's believed to have been killed with some of these weapons. The rounds were so mangled they weren't able to confirm it, but weapons were found at the scene that were from Fast and Furious. We want to get their justice in this process, that this shouldn't happen again. And by the way, I want the people at ATF who were ordered to do this, and in some cases the people who were lied to about what was going on in that same agency, I want them to get their reputation back. Because the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Fire, as an entity, they're the ones responsible to make sure gun dealers don't sell guns to people who shouldn't get them and the like. So it's a complex program, but it gets easy as soon as the administration says, okay, dumb idea, we were responsible, it won't happen again, here's what we're doing to change it. And for all of you that look at government, this is the biggest problem we have in government today, is you have an executive branch who says, we've got all the answers, just give us the money. And you've got Congress who is constantly being lobbied to do what the executive branch wants. And it doesn't matter who's in the White House. I've served under technically 3 presidents, but effectively 2 presidents now for a lengthy period of time. There's no change. All presidents are imperial. All presidents have all the answers. All cabinet officers want to give you a briefing but not have a hearing, and they don't want to necessarily tell you the truth at the briefing. They just want to tell you what they need to tell you to get out of the briefing. And it doesn't matter whether it's Secretary Gates or Secretary Rumsfeld before him. It doesn't matter any cabinet officer. We've had them all. The lesson, I think, for us is you want Congress not to get along with the executive branch. You want us to be respectful and reasonable and not be over the top. But at the same time, there's right and wrong goes on when you have 3 million people with a great deal of power. We need to have more of the job that my committee is charged at doing, and it needs to be taken very seriously. Fixing the post office, small job, all facts considered. Protecting liberty and making sure that the administration doesn't always need more money when the answer is we can't afford more money. How can you do your job without essentially taking more money from us every year on a constant dollar basis? But thank you, because that's an investigation that's not done yet, and it won't be done until Eric Holder basically says, here's where the screw-ups were, here's what we're doing to change it. And I don't know whether it'll be Eric Holder or his replacement, but right now, every bit of information we've gotten from whistleblowers. What we get from the Justice Department is a big black sheet of paper. They call it redacting, where a white piece of paper is all covered with black. It'd be really funny, but you hold these things up, and they say, well, we've been producing. It's like you produced 900 pages that were basically black. And oh, by the way, here's what your whistleblowers have given us, and it shows what you didn't want to show us. I'm going to add one thing, because I mentioned FOIA earlier. We had a smaller problem, but it's equally important to my committee. The Department of Homeland Security, and I know we all love to hate TSA and all the other things that go with Homeland Security, but they got a new cabinet officer in there, and her people, she was a former governor, Secretary Napolitano, decided they were going to protect her, so they ordered all the Freedom of Information requests, if they looked like they were from a newspaper or they could be sensitive, to be sent to the political appointees, and they would decide what, if anything, to release when. And in some cases, they released to other press agencies before they let the press agency that asked for it. In other words, they deliberately spoofed the work of some press reporter who was trying to get information. In other cases, they just redacted and didn't give it. We still don't have that changed. And America's greatest challenge is when the government says we don't have to tell you. The most important thing, whether you're left or right, is that government be every day more transparent, because without that, we're going to be no different than any other country in the world that goes the wrong direction. Government inherently wants to control in secrecy. Democracy is absolutely based on having a real view into the workings of government.
Congressman, you provided some pretty compelling suggestions on how to reform the post office. And I guess my question is, why isn't Congress doing its jobs and implementing those reforms? Why are they powerless to do something about that?
Remember, I told you they had 170,000 more workers than they needed? They're all union members. You've got over 500,000 postal workers. Actually, you have about 600,000 postal workers. And even the supervisors have an association. They have a powerful lobby. But there's other problems. One of the problems is, and this is why you notice I didn't talk about closing one post office. My bill creates a mandate to close unnecessary post offices and distribution. I'm not going to name those post offices, because every time you name a post office, it's in somebody's congressional district, and there's a whole protectorate system. Because as soon as the post office near you closes, even if you've never been there, you kind of get sentimental about your post office. And by the way, I'm sitting here in Cleveland. This is an urban area. Your post offices are pretty big. You got to get to Montana. Kathy and I drove through Montana and Idaho and these places, and along a two-lane country road, there's this kind of a cookie-cutter cinder block building every 15 or 20 miles forever. And they could just give them to the city and say, look, we'll put the mail in the boxes in here and you do the rest, and there's a stamp machine. And they could save all the money and just give them to the city. But the cities are very sentimental about it. And that every post office has a postal worker, or 2 or 3, has a postal supervisor, and has a postmaster. Now you're noticing that you could have as few as 3 workers and have at least 2 supervisors. And by the way, that's not including the people that actually deliver the mail. That's the people for that hub. We have 30,000 of those. That's a lot. So urban people don't see it. As a matter of fact, they're not terribly attached to their post offices by comparison. Rural people tend to be that. Senator Collins of Maine she wants to do a bailout. She has this whole idea of recalculating the debt so they wouldn't have to put any money into their retirement, therefore they wouldn't be losing money. And bless her heart, I mean, She's one of my fellow Republicans, but she's from Maine, and she just wants to make the problem go away. It's a losing business, and renegotiating a loan on a losing business only forestalls the inevitable. Stopping losing and even getting to a small profit forestalls foreclosure forever. And so, is it going to be hard to get it through? I think in the environment that started last Friday, it may be a lot easier than you think.
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Hi, welcome to Cleveland. Nice to see you, and really happy you're here. But I have a question, which is kind of a we the people question.
Sure.
When is Congress going to make our president get serious about immigration, get serious about closing our borders, get serious about recognizing states' rights? Is that too many questions?
No. Actually, it's the easiest question to answer. You, the voters, will do that in 2012. And I wasn't trying to be partisan. You, the voters, in 2010 had one of the largest shifts in history, bringing in a Republican majority that have stopped a lot of the directions the president wanted to go. You didn't bring in a Republican Senate, and you didn't have an opportunity to change who was in the White House, but you set a tone that this president either has to change or not get reelected. So far, he's not changing. But also, you've set a tone for who's going to be the Republican if there is one who wins. Because right now, we're still looking through for somebody who actually believes that these are broken. George. No. I'm here today, not in New Hampshire. But let me just tell you one thing. George W. Bush, by the time he left office, got it. He just didn't get it early enough. The difference between George W. Bush and the next president, other than President Obama, may be, do they get it early? Immigration reform isn't hard. Immigration reform is recognizing that there are jobs in America that will make America more competitive if we offer them to temporary labor. And there are jobs in America that Americans would like. They just don't know they're available because somebody's doing it. There's somebody doing a roofing job at $17 an hour, and nobody knows that he or she is an illegal. So can we database in this day and age? Oh, yeah. Can we, in fact, have a work program that people stand in line in Mexico or Guatemala for, and that companies here would sign up for because now they don't have to have a sort of clandestine, illegal economy? Yes. Do we have the will to do it? You got to have the will to do it early on. George W. Bush had a different plan when he came in. By the time he left, he would have loved the plan that is possible. So I was only half kidding about the next president, but it's not about this president. It's too late for this president to change his direction. But it's important that the next president, Republican or Democrat, start off early saying this is a priority, we can fix it, and we have to fix it in a common sense way. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to Congressman Darrell Issa, U.S. Representative of California's 49th District. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.